Hello and welcome to another episode of Tribal Council Chat. My name is Brett Parnell, one of your hosts.
And my name is Bruce Heller. We have a great episode for you guys today.
We sure do. Celebrating the premiere last night. It'll be a few days after when you guys see this of the Challenge USA 2. We are doing, as you may have guessed by my t-shirt, the Michele Fitzgerald character profile.
Nice.
Definitely an episode that I've been looking forward to as one of my favorite player of all time, and I know a player you also like, Bruce.
Yeah,
So, do you ready to get into it?
let's go. Let, where are we starting at?
So let's go and start from, well, the marooning of Korong. I mean, I knew even if we go back quickly to the preseason coverage, I knew from this as a world traveler from the second that I saw Michelle's pregame coverage that I had a new favorite player
Yeah.
and was cheering for her the whole way just based off of that aspect that we have in common. What was your first thoughts of her game, especially going back to Gondol?
So I did not start watching the show until Ghost Island 36. So I saw Korong for the first time after Winners at War,
Fair enough.
which the thing that stuck out to me was because I knew she won ahead of time. Kind of going back to what we were saying with Samoa last week is that the edit is really weird. Like it doesn't show her very much at all for a lot of the game.
Yeah, it's an
Especially,
edit I'm sure we'll get into in a few minutes in more detail, but if you can pick out the few key moments, you see her as a winner. But
yeah,
if you pass by them, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
you kind of
And
have to
I
be
think
looking for it.
exactly. And I think let's start with really the first of those moments is really on Gondol when you see her, Anna, and Julia working well together as a three, whereas like Tyre's running crazy in the jungle.
Yeah, for sure. That those three built a relationship really quickly, which was good. Because I mean, on a tribe of six, you're guaranteed at least half. You just have to get one more person for any given vote to have majority.
Absolutely. And then also another big strength game was the fact that she's one of the few players who never goes to tribal until I think it's the merge.
Oh yeah, that gets forgotten, but yeah. I mean, I
Yeah,
think he probably would have been safe anyway had they had to go to tribal, but that definitely helps.
definitely.
It's the opposite of
Um,
Denise in 25, who just went to every tribal council the entire season somehow.
yeah, exactly. The and with the exception of a couple of like tribals like the first one where you have two tribes go in one episode. I mean, it's the opposite of Michelle in Winners At Worst. Silly
Yeah,
enough.
yeah, she had kind of a rough time in Winners at War being on the bottom most of the time, but I'm sure we'll get to that.
So I think it's an interesting start that we talk about that three-way alliance that she has. And then we go past, let's say we fast forward through a couple of votes that don't really affect her. Probably the first real time that we see some character moments out of Gondol because they keep winning is when Beast Mode Cowboy almost dies out there,
Yeah,
and just that raw emotion from the tribe in one of the most shocking scenes we've ever seen in Survivor. But
yeah,
then we go to next week with a swap, and we see them go from a solid three to Michelle now being on Chenlo, Anna being on Gondol, and Julia being on Exile.
yeah. That swap was interesting, and obviously it worked out for her, but that has to be in just a precarious position to be in. You have two really strong allies and bonds, and the three of you at a swap go three different directions. So,
Absolutely, one of the really like it worked out for her, but it's like almost how did that work out? Because we've seen time and time again swaps like that just destroy people's games.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And right after that swap happens, it brings me into that kind of like next moment where watching as a fan, I really was like, okay, she can win. And that's right after the swap with probably her one of I would say her most famous quote in Survivor. The way Nick treats me is not the way I'd let any man treat me in my regular life. Goes on and on. I don't need to be carried, bro. Right
Yeah,
once I saw that, I'm like, she can win.
yeah,
This is a she's playing a game where she might be on the bottom sometimes. She might be flipping back and forth sometimes, but you hear something like that, and you clearly that's designed for you to pick up of no matter what the other tribe mates may think or the audience, that she's going to stand on her own 2 feet and go all the way to the end of the game.
and smart enough to not push back against Nick like that in a confessional, but to just kind of smile and nod with him and not cause too much friction is a really smart move also.
It's almost like a flashback in a confessional to like Pavudi talking about JP way back in Cook Islands.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. So yeah, that I know that's a quote you use a lot. That's a pretty funny confessional from that season.
Yeah. And will be, as we mentioned, the title of this episode.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
Then let's move on to the merge, where there's obviously a couple of big points I want to talk about. But before I think the biggest like peak of her game, I want to talk about a reward challenge. We don't really mention reward challenges much.
Yeah.
But do you remember the like choose your own reward challenge in this season
A
where you
little
have
bit, not much.
so they're all doing like 1 foot balancing and you have the option to play for food or play for a letter from home or play for advantage.
Oh yeah.
I just wanted to bring this up because I love this reward challenge. Not only do I think they should do it again in every Survivor season, just because it was so interesting to see what players are valuing at that point and how that plays into both what they need in the game, what they think is important, and the character arcs. And like for example, someone like Ty is playing for advantage while Ty's been looking for advantages since literally the minute we were introduced to him, so that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Julia is an 18-year-old who's making it further than any teenager in the game and is playing for a letter from home.
Yeah.
Perfect, makes perfect sense for the character. Like where I want to bring this into Michelle's game and what I love about her winning that reward challenge is you have Michelle as a young female character in this game taking on a bounty hunter and a former NBA player to win a double cheeseburger, and she does it in seconds.
Oh yeah. That was great. That was awesome.
Yeah.
Especially because those two guys had gotten pretty annoying already by that point. I mean, they get worse after that, but they had already started getting
Seeing
annoying to me.
how the audience was exactly like you say, really going back to like when Alicia was in the game, getting frustrated and annoyed at Scott and Jason. It was like it had to be amazing whether you were like me cheering for Michelle, whether you were cheering for Abu in the game, doesn't matter. But just to see that clip of her
Yeah.
taking that first bite of the cheeseburger and not them.
Also, side note, speaking of Alicia, how weird was it for like an episode at least, her having a bug inside of her ear? I can't imagine how crazy that would feel.
But yeah, that would have been painful.
But I'm getting sidetracked. So, but yeah, that reward challenge was awesome. Seeing those two guys who were already really irritating lose was awesome.
So then um I'm sure I'm gonna skip over this next challenge because I mean I'm sure I'm gonna have lots to say when we actually get into a deep dive of the Korong season as a whole and not just Michelle's game.
Yeah.
But that fault not idol play was beautiful right after the award.
Oh, is
But
that
let's
when
go
they
on
look
to the
at
next.
Ty and ask him to play the idol and he says no? Yeah, that was so
Yeah,
satisfying. That was great.
because I think this is where it's from a middle of the game to a contender to win. And that is after she goes into the community challenge, wins it because she can remember all of the numbers in one swim, which blew Jeff's mind. No one was expecting you to be able to do that.
Yeah,
And then makes the decision to vote out her best friend in the game. What
yeah.
was your thoughts when you saw that?
I mean, and we've talked about this on the duos episode, I believe. Getting vote props to Julia for getting voted out by your best friend and number one ally and not taking it personal, like we've seen so many
Oh
people
yeah,
do. So good for her and good for Michele being able to build a bond in a relationship to where that type of reaction was possible. And the person being voted out knows it's not personal. So good relationship building there. Strong social play.
absolutely. Um, yeah, ultimately at the end of the day, I think both of them saw it was just a game, and I'm sure if it was the other way around, that say it got to five and Julia had to vote out Michele in order to sit next to Scott and Jason at the end, you would have seen a really similar reaction.
Yeah, for sure.
So then moving on a bit, we'll pass by the stake challenge, which I think, well, actually, let's not pass by it. I mean, who knows what would have happened in immunity, but Joe deciding to eat 3 feet of shish kebabs really helps Michele's game out at this point in time.
Yeah, I don't
Um,
not sure why
she's
Joe thought eating that much food at one time was a good like I get the temptation. I can't definitively say I wouldn't do something dumb like that, but yeah, we see how that worked out for poor Joe.
yeah. And it's actually let's rewind for a bit because I want to. Totally forgot I was thinking it was this episode, but it was the one before. I want to talk about that interaction between Michele and Ty because here's where I see a winner edit coming in again, and it's at the tribal that Jason goes home. But when you actually go back, it's like Ty was working with Scott and Jason for much of the beginning of the merge,
Yeah,
whereas Michele wasn't. She was working with Aubrey and Sydney. So I thought that that's where it was really interesting is because it's like Ty uses his advantage to put two votes on her, and Scott's going to bring this up at Final Tribal Council, despite the fact that Michele had zero chance of going home, because even though he thought he was closer in the main alliance than she was, and that she was just a vote, in reality, he might have had a closer relationship as a duo with Aubrey than she did, but she was closer to Sydney than um Ty knew.
yeah,
And it was that alliance was really 2 and 2, like two duos working together to beat the third duo of Scott and Jason.
yeah,
But Sydney and Aubrey is a oh, sorry, Sydney and Michele's a relationship that not as many people talk about as they really should at this point,
yeah.
especially when let Michele pulls out that quote to Ty that his comments at Tribal really is just a bunch of malarkey.
Well, and I think the Sydney Michele bond gets overlooked because people look at Sydney and Aubrey and think that was the big duo a lot of times.
Yeah.
Which admittedly, like Sydney was playing really well. She had close relationships with everyone that wasn't Scott and Jason, because
Oh, she was playing a great game.
those two just kind of isolated themselves from everyone else. But
Yeah.
and then if they hadn't already, they poured water on a fire made without tools just to make themselves look worse, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah,
So
Sydney
now
was incredible.
oh, absolutely. So now we go into the finale, and we mentioned there that with Joe giving Michele kind of an out, it made it that she had to win one challenge to get to the final three for sure um instead of two immunities. But at the same time, she possibly has to win immunity at this point. who
Yeah.
knows what would have happened in the real edit if she doesn't win? Because it's very possible that her and Sydney vote against Aubrey and Ty vote against Sydney or
Yeah.
vote against Michelle,
Yeah.
depending on who wins the challenge.
And
But
Ty's
they
kind of
make it look
unpredictable
like,
anyway, so who knows what Ty's gonna do.
yeah, they make it look like that Michelle's going if she doesn't win, and then she pulls off the win, as she's does repetitively throughout her Survivor career.
Yeah.
Um, that leads to fire between Aubrey and Sydney, and we see Sydney go home. Next, final thing before final, we get the vote out a juror twist. What do you think about that?
Okay, I was hoping we would get to this because this is probably going to be an unpopular opinion. I don't hate the remove a juror twist like a lot of people seem to. Like, I get the reasons people don't like it. It's not perfect, but it kind of requires you to know your castmates and
Yeah.
have relationships and social bonds because it requires you to think and know who's not going to be a vote for me, who's going to be a sure vote for this other person. And Michelle wins remove a juror, and I mean everyone can tell Neil's not a vote for you. So
I'm just going to even take it one step further, and this might be unpopular. Even whether Michelle wanted or not, I love the twist.
yeah,
And
I like
the
it
reason
better
I'm
than I like it better than a lot of the twists from the new era.
I think it's one of the better twists that they've done. And the reason I like it is because you have a jury, but this almost includes like jury selection that you would see in a criminal trial into the survivor jury. And if a juror is publicly displaying their bias, you have the chance to throw them off.
Yeah,
And Neil was doing just that, tribal after tribal after tribal, in favor of Aubrey. And from what I've picked up, he was doing it at Ponderosa too.
yeah, and that's part of being a juror is trying to make the case for the person you like with other jurors, but that's what you do. You do it at Ponderosa. You don't do it on the jury bench where it's very clear because I mean that came back to bite him here and it was great to watch. I wish they would bring this twist back.
So now we go into final, and then we'll talk about final tribal and then skip right to winners at war. But going into final tribal council, I think there's two jurors here that really swing it in her favor when you're watching. The first, as we already hinted on, is Julius.
Yeah.
And Julia comes up, expresses that Michelle blindsided her, and you're like, oh, where's this going? They're editing it really well. And then Julia throws in that line, but I was proud of you.
Yeah.
And at that point, you know that she's been, just like Neil's been campaigning for Aubrey, she's been campaigning for Michelle
Yeah.
across this whole jury. The second that I think is really interesting is Scott's, probably one of my favorite jury speeches of all time. And in Scott's jury speech, you have what we just saw playing out, whereas he's makes a good point that a lot of times in Survivor, it's not so much like we saw if she got to the final and Winners at War, Denise wouldn't have got a whole lot of respect for the Sandra move because it was a month ago.
Yeah.
And Scott really points that out that he says if this was 3 weeks ago, Michelle would have been last place. But look at what we just saw. Aubrey
Yeah.
got weaker, Ty got weaker, Michelle got stronger.
Yeah.
And that perfectly sums up her game. For the last few weeks of it, she was blindsiding her ally. She was going head to head with Ty and pointing out fallacies in his game, proving that he wasted his advantage trying to target her. Because credit to Ty, he was the only one out there who saw Michelle as a threat to win.
Yeah.
And then goes in and wins the last few challenges and dominates the physical game.
Yeah.
And I think that about sums up her win.
It
Something Aubrey
definitely
didn't do.
it definitely ramps up more at the end than didn't start off that way, but picked up steam when it counted. And props to her for that. Real quick, I'm gonna get sidetracked for 3 seconds because you mentioned the Denise and Sandra move. That was a dumb move, but that's an explanation I can get into on another episode. Just wanted to throw that out there.
Just like I mentioned, we'll do a Winners at War episode, a Kalong episode at some point. We'll be doing a Winners at War episode at some point, I'm sure.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, really dramatic move by Denise. The shock factor was good, but just not a smart move to me. But I digress.
So let's get into Winners at War. We'll jump ahead a bit because of time. But we see they hit the beach on Cele, and we see a few interesting things here. First, Michele starts on the bottom because I think at this point is really the first time that we kind of realize, and maybe social media has taught us right as it was playing out, that you and I's favorite winner both have a pre-existing relationship that I don't think a lot of people knew coming in.
Yeah, I didn't realize that her and Natalie were close.
Yeah.
I mean,
And
they
then,
clearly become even closer when Natalie comes back from the edge later. But as far as before the game, I didn't know that until I read that on social during the game.
I didn't either. So then we see Michele come on, and really her first, well, for the first couple of episodes, her main storyline is how she doesn't feel that she deserved to win and is now playing in a season with 20 winners.
Yeah,
And it's that period of Michele accepting the fact that she is a worthy winner. She played the best game in her first season. She deserves to be in Fiji for season 40. And as she says at one point in a voiceover, that she deserves this win even more. And
yeah.
when I saw that, I knew she was going far in the game.
And this also is where the Rob quote that you like so much comes in.
Oh, my favorite scene of four. We've had 44 seasons of Survivor. That's my favorite scene in the whole franchise.
Yeah. So for those of you that don't know the random reference off the top of their head, like I do, because why would you? It's a really weird line. Obscure scene from that season is Rob says to Michele, "If you win, you win. That's the end,"
Exactly.
which can be
And
applied to any winner, even the ones like
I
I
was
would have
just going to
voted
say
for the other person. They got the jury to vote for them, and that's what counts at the end.
exactly it. It's the same from Richard Hatch to dominant winners like Tony, Perv, Sandra, to less dominant winners like Michele or Gabler or Natalie.
Or Bob. I don't know why that just popped into my head, but Bob. Shout out to him for
Yeah,
some reason.
yeah, absolutely. Definitely deserved win. All of them.
Yeah.
So after we get that, we go into the swap again. And this is, I think, I've talked to both of these contestants in the exact same night at a viewing party for 41. Probably one that they agree is the least favorite episode of Survivor, and that's just this editing between
Oh, yeah.
Wendell and Michele.
Yeah, it's really weird.
Why production felt the need to do that, I really have no clue. I mean, if anybody is just watching the season, sorry to spoil it, but they are both close friends in real life to this
Yeah.
day.
They edited that really weird. And like I even like re I've been rewatching every season in order from my favorite to my least favorite. And it's been a few months. That's while I was still at school. So at least since like April or May, but I like even knowing their friends in real life, watching those episodes, like they really edit it to look like there's friction there when it seems like in real life there isn't. So, and that didn't even
Exactly.
become a major storyline that disappeared after like the next episode. So,
I went to an event that Wendell hosted that Michele came to, and both of them were said it was that they're very close in real life. So, like we say about when people determined who they think should have won, not everything that is necessarily happens in the edit is what it really happened out on the island.
yeah, very
And
true.
then after that, we see what I find is interesting. We see a lot of respect for Michele over this period where she's getting fire tokens, notably from Peru.
Yeah,
It really, I guess, another weird thing I find in the edit is, I guess, if the players gave them, they have to edit it in. But how her receiving tokens from players like Parvati and then not Parvati voting for Nat at the end, I always found to be some odd editing as well.
Well, I think part of that was Edge of Extinction. Parvati had a chance to grow a closer relationship with Natalie through Edge of Extinction, spent more time with her than she did in the game with Michele. So,
Makes sense.
and I don't hate Edge the way most people do, but that one example, like with jurors, is kind of an example of if they bring Edge back, it needs to be tweaked and fixed a little bit. Because,
So now's where we see the kind of mid new school alliance that seemed to be a pregame alliance with Michele, with Wendell, with Adam, all kind of go week after week. And then she survives it and keeps playing the game after the two of them leave.
yeah,
Um, which really shows that she's definitely building those social relationships with other players and not just sticking with one alliance and is going to go down with the sinking ship. We see right after that happens, I'm pretty sure if I remember correctly, Jeremy plays safety without power, and then it becomes Tyson who leaves the game
yeah,
right after, and Michelle's still there.
yeah. And good for Jeremy saving himself that round. Someone from his alliance still ended up going home there, so who knows? Because Tyson wasn't with the Tony alliance, was he? There was kind of at that point there was two alliances, so I'm kind of curious what
Was
happens there if Jeremy doesn't dip out,
I
but
think
I guess we'll never know.
we'll never know, but I get the sense that Jeremy may have walked out on his own alliance. We could have seen players like Tyson, Michele, Nick, Jeremy go a lot further in the game if he stays.
Yeah, like I get it, and I think I've heard somebody say on a podcast somewhere that Jeremy was the target of the Tony Alliance that night, but I mean the numbers weren't solid for either side.
Yeah.
So, but yeah,
Big story, I guess, with her game comes in the form of a coin from Exile.
yeah, the
And
50.
that's the 50-50 coin that she buys, which she flips and is safe.
Yeah,
What do you think of that twist?
I like the 50-50 coin. And honestly, I like fire tokens. Like I know they don't seem to be super popular amongst fans, but I thought they were cool. They're a cool idea if you tweak it a little bit. I don't know that I
Yeah.
would spend the amount of tokens on the 50-50 that she did because I mean, it's literally a coin toss. Who knows? Like I think it was 4 tokens is a lot to spend on a pretty good chance you're not safe still. But I mean, it works for her.
Exactly.
It saves her.
And
She
then
asks to keep it as a souvenir, and Probst says no for some reason, which is just kind of a funny little thing that the production threw in there. But it was a fun twist. I wouldn't have spent 4 tokens on it, but it worked for her. So good job.
yeah. And that leads right into a next point that she's part of, which is Tony gets the This Is Extortion episode. And how this ties into Michelle's game is Tony goes right to Michele and asks her for tokens because he's getting extorted by Natalie and Perth.
Yeah.
And she doesn't have any because she spent them on the 50-50 coin.
Yeah.
So I thought this was actually really smart of her not to be able to get through this and reveal her or not reveal her exact advantage to Tony so he couldn't say, oh, let's vote Michele out so we at least use this coin and it keeps her in the game.
Yeah. Really smart move there. Also, watching Tony read the extortion letter and go from excited because he thinks he gets to extort someone and he's a cop and he never gets to do that to then realizing he's the one being extorted and saying this is illegal in the real world. Why isn't it illegal here? It's just peak Tony. Like I love how chaos incarnate that guy is sometimes.
Yeah. So let's jump into the finale where again for this. It was great TV to see it once, to see Michelle get the three towered puzzle twice.
Yeah,
Um, was amazing.
and then kick
She
it
wins
twice.
another clutch challenge. Um, TJ Lavin, if you're watching, put the three towered puzzle in an elimination sometime. Make sure she's in it.
Yes, that'd be fun.
Um, but yeah, she once again wins that, and the week before, when it's looking like she might go home, she wins the um Domino's challenge that Julia won in Kolong. So it was neat to see her win a challenge that she lost. Then the
Yeah,
next week in the finale, win one for the second time that she won. Well, she goes to the finale. We won't go into too much details on everything at the end of Winners at Work because we can do an episode on that. But I just want to end our discussion on her character as Michelle, even though she gets zero votes, she clearly garnered the respect of the jury and the audience and proved to be one of the best players of all time.
yeah, for sure. Especially if you're looking at social players specifically. But
Absolutely.
yeah, like zero vote finalist, yes, but played a really solid game in Winners at War. Probably just as good as her first game. The jury just wasn't there for her this time because she was up against Tony, who why we let Tony get past episode 2 or 3, I have no idea. But
I mean, if she would have been up against Nick or Denise, she would have won.
well, anybody wins against Denise, to be fair. Like she did the Sandra thing and then didn't do almost anything else that season after that.
Well, let's jump into Ally Blindside First Boot because we're running low on time. Do you want to take it away first this week?
Yeah, so I will go with I mean Michelle sat in the final 3 twice. I'm going with 3 people she sat next to with my favorite winner, Natalie Anderson. Somebody that's not super high on my favorite winners list, but is super entertaining and I love his chaos. That's Tony. And then I'm also gonna throw Aubrey in there as the third one.
Okay, interesting. You stole one of my three.
I
I'll
figure I
think
would
on the top of my
steal one
head.
of them.
Yeah, of course. Um, I will ally with Natalie. I think she's a very good player, but someone who's proven she can go far in the game and can really lead a group alliances. I mean, Tony is the easiest first boot in all of Survivor.
One would
You
think.
can't. We saw that guy in Winners at War go all the way. We saw him in Game Changers get voted out second. I bet they all wish they voted him out first or second.
That was
And
glorious.
that leaves me to blindside Aubrey. Shout out to Victoria Bamonde. Greatest blindside of Aubrey you can have, and something I'd love to try to pull off too.
So as much as I would love to align with Natalie, she beats me at the end. And like you said, and like whenever I play this game and if winners and non-winners are mixed, I very rarely align with winners because that frightens me. But Tony is Tony, so you have to get rid of him first boot. Probably blindside Natalie just because she beats me at the end. I don't see a way that if I'm playing with her that I don't get overshadowed, which leaves me with aligning with Aubrey left. And by the way, speaking of Aubrey, I said this on the Heroes versus Villains episode. As far as the co-wrong debate goes, both of the women there were deserving. I would have been happy either way. No offense to Ty here. I don't put him on the Russell Heroes versus Villains footing. He wasn't quite as deserving as the other two, or as Russell even was in Heroes versus Villains, but those two women in co-wrong, there wasn't a bad option.
Absolutely. Um, I have a theme with mine. We don't normally do this, but I mean, it's two different sets. We're going to post them on different days. So I'm just going to stick with my three if that's okay with you.
Oh yeah, of course.
Um, my theme is Michelle's rivals.
Oh boy.
So your options are Aubrey Bracco, who I think you knew I was sticking with,
Yeah.
Sarah Lucina, And let's throw a wrench into this, and I'm gonna give you one more player that's never been on Survivor, and that's Loyal Stuckey.
Oh god. Oh, that's an interesting twist. Oh gosh. Okay, can I just align with Mark the Chicken and move on? No, so it was. I'm gonna first. Well, I'd like to first boot Laurel. She can probably help my tribe in challenges in the pre-merge to help me stay away from tribal. So I'll blindside her as the merge boot. Who is the second name you said?
Lucina or
Oh
Aubrey?
yeah, it was Sarah. Okay. Well, Sarah's a winner, so I'll probably first boot her in align with Aubrey for the second time this episode, surprisingly. But Mark the Chicken and me are go. Shout out to Mark the Chicken that somehow managed to
Yes.
get through a whole season not getting eaten like most
Not
chickens do.
getting
So
As I've said many times in Survivor Fan Jury, I'm pretty sure the second that Kai releases Mark the Chicken into the jungle, a monitor lizard probably kills him within 5 minutes.
yeah, but Mark was a fun storyline that
Great
season.
episode.
Yeah. Hey, so this was a
Well,
lot of fun. We will be on socials this week with posts from the episode and see you guys next week. Bye, guys.
dip your toe, coaches and head back to camp.